Learning a little bit about music and a little bit how music fits together is one of the most important skills that you can learn as a guitar player. Some may be thinking, gosh, just teach me a couple of chords and I'm ready to go. Well, that's maybe the learn part of the learn and master guitar, but the part of when you get into the master part of it, you need to learn a little bit about music and about how music affects your playing as a guitar player. So we're going to take a second to learn a little bit about that. The road to all learning how chords are spelled, what notes, and how we can move those chords around, it all starts with major scales, and major scales are built up of half steps and whole steps. We talked about half steps a little bit previously. Okay, half step is distance between one note and his immediate neighbor. Okay, I get two half steps, I put them together, I get a whole step. Right? Remember the rule? The only naturally occurring half steps are between E and F and B and C. The only naturally occurring half steps are between E and F and B and C. Okay? But when we start to add things in here, you need to keep track of those sharps and flats, as you'll see. Okay? So if the distance between an F and a G is a whole step, then the distance from an F sharp to a G sharp is also a whole step. If an F to a G is a whole step, an F sharp to a G sharp is a whole step. Okay, see how that works? Let's do a couple of examples real quick. What's the distance from a C sharp to a D? Now, if you want to play this on your guitar, that's fine too. If you want to think about it in music, which is what we're going to put on the screen, I want you to think about it in music notation too, because this is true no matter whether you're playing a guitar, a piano, a trumpet, or a tuba. Okay, the distance between a C sharp and a D is a half step. If a C to a D is a whole step, I've moved that C closer to the D. Now C sharp to a D is just a half step. Okay? What is the distance from an E flat to an F? Think about that for a second. An E flat to an F. If an E to an F is a half a step, then if I scoot that E farther from that F a half a step, then it becomes an E flat, and that then becomes a whole step. So an E flat to an F is a whole step. What about the distance from a G to an A flat? Well, G to an A is a whole step. If I scoot that A closer down to that G, it becomes just a half step. So a G to an A flat is a half step. Now let's talk about major scales. Everything that we're talking about from this point on, all the theory, all the harmony stuff, what notes you can add to chords to sound hip and colorful in your sound, it is all based off of one thing I've found: major scales. Okay? Major scales are the building blocks for all of music, and they are built from a specific pattern of half steps and whole steps. It's like math. It's like a formula. I know many of you, math may not have been your best subject, but music has a lot to do with math. In fact, many studies have found that if you have a student that's struggling in math, if you teach them music, something about the order and the presentation of the music helps them in their math skills. So something about that in our brains connects the two together in the same way we process the information. Okay, major scales are built from a pattern. It's a pattern of half steps and whole steps. You ready for the pattern? Here it is. The pattern for a major scale is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Okay, so it's 2 whole steps and a half step, 3 whole steps and a half step. That's how a major scale is made. You start on any note, whether it's a F or a G or a B flat or a G flat. You start on that note and you build up, just like in building blocks, half step, or you build it in the half step, whole step pattern, 2 holes and a half, 3 holes and a half, and you end up with the major scale. Let's try this a little bit. Let's start in C. Okay, so if I have a C major scale, I start on a C, then the pattern says I need to go up a whole step. The distance from a C to a D is a whole step, so I would just go right up to D. Then I need another whole step. A D to an E is a whole step. Then I need a half step, the pattern says. E to an F, conveniently, is a half step. Next one, I need a whole step. Whole step up from an F would be a G. Whole step up from a G would be an A. Whole step up from an A would be a B.